Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this is Bill Cook, Director of Operations for STAN. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 6th, 2015 edition of STAN's National Emergency Coalition conference call. It's my honor and privilege now to turn the call over to STAN founder and president, Bishop E.W. Jackson.
Thank you so much, Bill. Folks, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your continuing commitment to saving this nation. And the emergency does indeed continue. We've got a very special guest for today. I believe this is one of the critical issues of our time, and this gentleman is an expert on the issue. I'm calling, by the way, talking to you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I just spoke to a group of about 300 pastors out here. And folks, the awakening continues as well. The darkness continues, but the light, I believe, is really getting brighter and brighter. So you be encouraged. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that we are not hopeless, we are not helpless, we are not hapless. We thank you, Lord, that we are the people of the living God, that we are Americans who have inherited the freedom, the opportunity, the prosperity that is unparalleled in all of human history. And now, Lord, as stewards of this great nation that you've given us, we are trying to make sure that the foundational principles which made this the greatest nation on earth are never lost, but in fact are strengthened and revitalized. And once again, this nation is set solidly on those foundational principles so that the future of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be secure in those principles so that this nation remains the land of the free and the home of the brave, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We thank you for these leaders who are on the call. We thank you for all that they are doing in their various fields of action to try to make sure that they preserve and protect this great constitutional republic. And we thank you for our guest today, Bill Federer, who is a scholar and a person who has really done the research to help inform us and enlighten us so that we are intelligent in understanding what it is we are facing, particularly in terms of the threat of Islam. So, Father, we give you the praise, the honor, and the glory for victory because we believe, just like George Washington did, that no matter how bad it may look, that we are on the side of right and freedom, and we are going to win. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, folks, our guest, and Bill, do we have it? Yes, we got it.
I'm here.
Our guest is a great friend, a prolific author, written 20 books, has written recently and done extensive lecturing on the problem of Islam, not just in America, but the problem of Islam, period, and understanding Islam. Because, folks, I just said to Bill before the call started, I said, we have three major issues that we are facing. The one is life, the other is marriage, and the third is Islam. I think ultimately, long-term, Islam is a greater threat than Russia, even Russia or China. Because I think, frankly, long-term, Islam is a threat to both Russia and China, just as it is to us. So without any further delay, you can read his biography and the material we sent out, and he'll tell you more about how to get in touch with him and the work that he is doing. Bill, thanks so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule. In fact, you and I met getting off of a plane together, so I know you're on the move. Thanks for taking time. Take Bill the next 20 minutes or so and share with us some insights that you think most people probably not aware of with regard to Islam. And folks, because we asked our guests to stay only 30 minutes, if you have a question or a comment, if you would press *6 during his talk, you won't interrupt him. He won't hear it. But when he gets done with that, we can come immediately to the phones and keep the call going without wasting any time. So, Bill, with that, go right ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like everyone to know how much I tremendously respect Bishop E.W. Jackson and the tremendous work that you've been doing and are doing, and it's an honor to be on the call together with you today. The stories we see in the news about Muslims killing people, and then we hear people say, well, the killers do not represent true Islam. And yet when the killers are doing the killing, they are yelling Allahu Akbar, and they say they are representing true Islam. Well, who can tell us what true Islam is? Well, there's only one person, Muhammad. Muhammad was the best Muslim that ever lived, so his life is the DNA. It's the example. It's the ones that Muslims are striving to be like. And when we put his life under a microscope, we see that it went through 3 stages which are vital in understanding those who are trying to follow his example. The first stage, Muhammad was a religious leader from 610 AD to 622 AD, and he only made 70 converts in 12 years. The story of his conversion is he had been 25 years old. He was born in 570 AD, and his father dies before he was born. His mother died when he was 6 years old. His grandfather and guardian died when he was 8 years old. So he was orphaned and taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who was a merchant who would take Muhammad on camel rides. They would go to different cities, hear about the different religions. In Arabia, they had 360 different pagan gods. The most popular god in each town was the Allah for that town, and they were all associated with the sun and the moon, Baal, Ashtaroth, so forth. Well, the most popular god in Mecca was Hubal, the moon god. They had this rock they thought had fallen from the moon, and they would kiss it and walk around it and bow to it. Muhammad kissed that rock, and it got incorporated into his belief system. And then he would go with his uncle to Persian cities and hear about the Zoroastrian religion. Zoroastrians believed that paradise was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires. This got incorporated into his belief system. Zoroastrians also believed in jinns or genies, and so that's why they are mentioned in Islam. And then the Jewish faith. And Muhammad was illiterate. He could never read and write. And the word Quran means recitation because it's an oral thing, because Muhammad and his original followers were illiterate. And so Muhammad never read the Old Testament, but he heard their oral stories, their Talmud and Mishnah, and some of those stories got incorporated into his belief system. And then the Christian faith. And even Encyclopedia Britannica stated of Muhammad, the gospel was known to him chiefly through apocryphal and heretical sources. So Muhammad thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. Nobody explained to him the Holy Spirit. And so we see all these different beliefs are combined together, and the story is that he was in a cave praying. He was 25 years old and married a wealthy widow, Khadijah. She was 40 years old. And so he's in a cave praying, and a spirit appeared to him and squeezed him and commanded him to read. He said, I cannot read. Spirit squeezed him again and said, read. He said, I cannot read. It happened a third time. Finally, the spirit threw him down, and Muhammad began to recite. And that's how these verses came to him. He'd get them in his mind. He'd repeat them till he had them memorized, then he would teach them to his followers. And so people say, well, how can somebody that's illiterate memorize these long verses? Well, in Arabic, they had a little rhyme to them, a little beat, very similar to rap music today. So you might have a student that can't read in school, but he memorizes these long rap songs and gathers a following around him. Well, Muhammad goes into Mecca, and he tries to make converts, and in 10 years, he only makes 70 converts. And he gets a little frustrated and gets confrontational. And so the people of Mecca consider him as a disturber of the peace. Then his wife, Khadijah, dies in 619 AD. His wealthy uncle, Abu Talib, dies in 619 AD. And the people of Mecca say, this is our opportunity to chase him out of town. And so it's his quote-unquote year of sorrows. And so he's chased out of town. He goes to a city called Al-Taif. And they don't want Muhammad, and so they pelt him with rocks and throw dust at him and chase him out of town, little kids jeering at him. And so Muhammad does not have a place to live. He is a Muslim refugee. He is a immigrant, so to speak. So he goes to a Jewish city called Medina. 3 Jewish tribes control the city. They never got along with each other, but they are nice, and they let Muhammad in as a Muslim refugee, as an immigrant. He goes into the minority neighborhoods, and he begins to organize a following. We're familiar with the term of organizing in the community, and so he gets a following, goes back to the Jews, and pressures them to accommodate him politically and make a treaty with him. And now Muhammad is a political leader in addition to being a religious leader. Then his followers in Mecca, they get pushy, argumentative, confrontational, and threatening. They get chased out of town for disturbing the peace. They go to Medina, and Muhammad, so they're Muslim refugees too. They're immigrants, and so they're allowed into the Jewish city of Medina, and they go into Muhammad's neighborhoods, and Muhammad allows his followers to rob the caravans headed back to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out of town. And so where Jesus said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt, his attitude was, if they take your house, you retaliate, take their caravan. And so Muhammad got a whole chapter of the Quran, chapter 8, Surah 8, on how to distribute booty from robbing caravans. He got a fifth of the booty. And so when the Meccans sent 1,000 soldiers to protect their caravan, Muhammad with 300 warriors defeats 1,000 at the Battle of Badra in 624 AD. This amazing victory, having been outnumbered 3-1, convinces Muhammad to be a military leader, and he fights in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. He even goes to that city of Al-Taif, and he uses catapults to hurl rocks and stones into the city. And they're killing innocent women and children. And so they go tell Muhammad that he's killing women and children when he's using these catapults. His response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So ISIS killers and suicide bombers today say it's okay to kill innocent people to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And since he is the best Muslim that ever lived, Muslims that want to be better Muslims, they want to be like him, religiously, politically, and militarily. And so it's a threefold system. So there's freedom for all religions in America. But Islam is not just a religion because Muhammad was not just a religious leader. He was a political and a military leader. So a mosque is a religious building, a political building, and a military building. Bowing to Mecca is a religious bowing, a political bowing, and a military pledging of allegiance to another capital. And our effort in the West to arbitrarily split the religious side of Islam away from the political military side is we're trying to split Muhammad. Who are we to split their prophet? He was all three. Now, there have been Muslims that have backslidden from following his example, but unfortunately, the fundamental Muslims want to get back to following his example, and they're pressuring others to do that as well. And so we see that when Muhammad is in the city of Medina, these three Jewish tribes, he gets offended at one of the Jewish tribes, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. Gets offended at the second Jewish tribe, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. This actually set a precedent in Islam called Hudna, H-U-D-N-A, Hudna. It means when you're weak, you make treaties until you get strong enough to disregard them. The third Jewish tribe, Muhammad bottled them in their neighborhood for 25 days. When they finally surrendered, he brings them into the market and chops off their heads. 600 or 700 of them had their heads chopped off. And so he did keep the women and children for slaves and sell them into slavery. Matter of fact, the Muslims enslaved over 1.5 million Europeans. There were entire Catholic orders throughout the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians, and they would try to ransom back, your friend that got captured from a Greek coast or an Italian coast or from an island in the Mediterranean. And the Muslims enslaved 180 million Africans. Muhammad was a white Arab, and there are hadith stories that say when he would lift his arms to pray, they would see the whiteness of his armpits. Another guy's on a donkey going to early morning prayer with Muhammad, and it rubs up against him, and he said, I saw the whiteness of the prophet's thigh. Another hadith said these visitors wanted to see Muhammad, and they said he is the white man reclining on the couch. And Muhammad owned African slaves like Bilal. And in Arabic, they have one word for African and slave. It's the same word. It's abd, A-B-D. Like Abdullah means slave of Allah. And so abd means slave, but it also means African. And so they would castrate the men, make them eunuchs, sell the women into the sex trafficking and forced marriages. And slavery, Muslims enslaved Africans for 8 centuries before America was ever discovered. And when the Spaniards did discover America, they enslaved the Native Americans for about 50 years until a Catholic priest, Bartolome de las Casas, finally got the King of Spain to outlaw the enslavement of the Native Americans. And no sooner did they finish celebrating than the greedy Spaniards say, where can we get more slaves? And someone said Africa. And that's when the Spanish and Portuguese began to buy Africans from the Muslim slave markets and bring them into the New World. But even David Livingstone in the 1800s would write about being a missionary in the Congo and seeing these Arab Muslim slave traders having 1,000 Africans tied together, marching single file 500 miles through the jungle to the coast. And if they marched too slow, they would just kill them. And he says you could tell where the slave trails were by looking for the vultures circling. But anyway, back to Muhammad. So within 5 years of him immigrating to the Jewish city of Medina, there is not a Jew left in the city of Medina. So we see this precedent in Islam where they first come in as immigrants, as refugees, because that's what Muhammad was. And then they gravitate and form communities, and then they demand political accommodation. And then they eventually become violent. And so we see this happening in Europe. 10 years ago, there were 3 mosques in Germany. Today, there's over 200. The number one crime in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark is rape. Muslim immigrant men killing and raping European women. In London, neighborhoods like Birmingham, Liverpool, and Manchester have been completely taken over by Muslims. Matter of fact, Mohammed is the number one name for newborns in London, England, Milan, Italy, Brussels, Belgium. And most of southern Holland is Moroccan Muslim. There are 751 neighborhoods around Paris that have been taken over by 3 million Muslims, and all the police can do is put up a sign that says, enter at your own risk. And so we see this happening in America. And I was in Dearborn, Michigan, and after my talk, the people came to my book table, and someone said, oh, this lady had a ministry to pregnant moms. She shows up at the Muslim house with a little present. Out of a bedroom comes another pregnant Muslim mom. Out of a bedroom comes another pregnant Muslim mom. Out of a bedroom comes another pregnant Muslim mom, all pregnant by the same man. He's practicing Sharia law in his house. And then another guy comes to my book table, says Fazil bought a bunch of houses on the street, has a wife in each one. They go down to the welfare office, say the husband's not around, and they get the checks. He visits them, and the more kids they have, the bigger the checks get. He's living like a king, and all the kids playing in the street are his kids. He is practicing Sharia law on his block. They take over several more blocks. They vote in the school board, and now they have their Sharia-compliant burqas and everything in the schools in Dearborn, Michigan. And then they take over more blocks and vote in the police department, fire department, and now they have their minarets and calls to prayer 5 times a day, no different than Pakistan. And so we see that the first ones come in as immigrants, and then they gravitate together and form communities, and then they demand political accommodation. And then that person that says, I am not going to move out of the neighborhood, I grew up here, that's when there's Muslim youth that do random violence, and there's no witnesses, because no Muslim family will testify against another Muslim family on behalf of some kafir infidel. And so they eventually take over the neighborhood, and they call it Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. So the word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah, and they think there will be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. So it is a religion of peace. It's just their definition of the word peace is different than ours. Our definition of peace is different groups getting along. Their definition of peace is when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. Sort of like Lincoln said, we all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. We all want peace, but in using the same word, we don't mean the same thing that they do. And so the moderate Muslim thinks the world is going to submit to Allah later, maybe in the distant future, maybe at the end of the world, and since it's so far off, it does not occupy his every thought. He just wants to live his life. That's fine. That type of Muslim has no problem living in a free country and having you as a kafir infidel as a neighbor. The fundamental Muslim thinks the world is supposed to submit to Allah now, and they're really excited, and they want to help make it happen. Now, the dilemma for us in the West is the more we bend over backwards in unprecedented ways to show ourselves tolerant of Islam, the more the moderate Muslim begins to rethink and say, wait a second, maybe the world is in fact submitting to Allah now rather than later. So they gravitate from the future peaceful moderate camp into the fundamental now camp, which is the violent camp. So this is just a nutshell. I could go through, how the Muslims conquered Egypt, which had been Coptic Christian for 6 centuries, started by Mark that wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, until the Muslim leader Amir ibn al-As conquered Egypt. Syria used to be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. Matter of fact, Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, and the name Christian was first used in Syria. There's more ancient Christian writing in the Syrian language of Syriac than any other language other than Greek and Latin. And the Syrian Christians evangelized east, like the Greeks did west. They evangelized into India, Mongolia, even China. During the Tang dynasty in the 600s, had a thriving Syrian Christian community, but it was largely wiped out in Central Asia by Tamerlane, this Muslim leader that killed 17 million people. But then the Muslims invade into what is today Turkey. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were wiped out by the Muslim Turks. And so Ephesus, Colossae, Galatia, all these New Testament letters, those cities they were written to were all wiped out by the Muslims. The Greek Christians begged the West for help. The West sends help. It's called the what? The Crusades.
The Crusades.
And so there's 9 major Crusades in 200 years. The Crusades basically saved Europe. You think, how could the Crusades save Europe? The Muslims conquered by capturing one little kingdom and another little kingdom and another little kingdom, sort of like they divided those Jewish tribes up in Medina. And the Crusades caused the Europeans to see the bigger picture. I may not like the French and the Spanish and the English, but I'll work together with them to stop the Muslim invasion because they want to kill us all. Sort of like the 13 colonies in America didn't get along, but they all had to work together to stop the King of England who wanted to take away all their rights. And so the Crusades actually created the concept of Europe, this bigger picture called Christendom. But when the Crusades ended, and in the year 1300, the Muslims continued, and they surrounded Constantinople in the year 1453. Why is this significant? Once Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople in 1453, it cut off the land routes to India and China. People forget Marco Polo in 1271 went from Venice, Italy to China, worked for Kublai Khan, brought back spaghetti, coal, and gunpowder. But when the Muslims captured Central Asia and conquered Constantinople, it cut off the land trade routes. The Europeans started looking for a sea route. Portugal tried to go around South Africa, but it was Christopher Columbus in 1492 that said, I have an idea to get to India, sail directly west. He runs into some islands, thinks he's in India, so he names the people he meets the Indians. So think of it. We never would have called Native Americans Indians if it had not been for Islamic Jihad and the Islamic State cutting off the land routes to India and China. Right? Because Columbus gave him the name Indians because he thought he was in India. And so all the people that blamed Columbus for being a terrible person, well, he never would have even set sail if it had not been for the Muslims cutting off the land routes to India and China. And so then they had piracy, and one of the pilgrim ships in 1625 went back from, Massachusetts to England, and it had 800 pounds of beaver skins until the Turkish man of war captured it in the English Channel, took it to Morocco, and sold them into slavery. And so then they captured an entire Irish village in 1635, the stolen village of Baltimore, Ireland, rounded them up, took them to Morocco, sold them into slavery. In 1637, they captured 400 from Reykjavik, Iceland. These Muslim pirates, sort of like Boko Haram, just came up and surprised them and captured a bunch and took them away. There were whole coasts of Italy where there was not a woman of childbearing age for generations because the Muslim pirates would take them. And in the year 846 A.D., 11,000 Muslims invaded Rome, Italy, and they trashed the bones of St. Peter and St. Paul. It was after that that Pope Leo decided to build the wall around the Vatican because it was actually outside of the city of Rome. And so,
hey, Bill, let me try to, because look, man, you could go on for 3 hours and it's fascinating. I could just sit and listen to you. I mean it. Let's open it up for some questions, folks. And if you're hearing a little bit of an echo, forgive me. I'm in a fairly cavernous room. But look, if you have questions for Bill Federer, if you've been on this call, you can hear the level of expertise is profound. I tell people this man is a compendium of information about Islam and about world history. Now, Bill, so folks, if you've got questions, press *6 and get in queue, and I'll come to you in a second. Bill, give me this. Tell me, how do you read? Someone with your knowledge of Islam and how it's moved throughout human history, put President Barack Obama, who of course some people suspect he is a Muslim. I don't share that view, but I think he does have a lot of Islamic sympathies, and I think that's not even a dispute. But put him in perspective. How do you see him and his response and the way he approaches Islam and together with the influx of refugees and all of that? Can you put that in some kind of perspective for us?
Actions speak louder than words. So if we set aside his words and just look at his actions, what conclusions can we draw? Well, it's interesting. Muhammad approved of lying to spread Islam. There was a warrior chieftain who was planning on attacking Muhammad, and he said, "Who will rid me of this warrior chieftain?" One of Muhammad's followers said, "I will if you permit me to lie." Muhammad said, "Go." So Muhammad's follower goes to this chieftain and said, "I've left Muhammad. He's a heretic. I want to help you, but they're after me." And this chieftain says, "Well, tell you what, you can spend the night in my tent. You'll have the whole army surround you. You'll be protected. Well, in the middle of the night, this follower of Muhammad tiptoes over and beheads the chieftain, grabs the head, runs all the way to Muhammad, gives it to him, and says, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad said, oh, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad gives him his staff and said, you can lean on this in the day of judgment, because on that day, many people won't have anything to lean upon. So Muhammad approved of lying to your enemy so that you can behead him. Another story is there was a follower of Muhammad's who was captured and forced to renounce Muhammad. He escaped and went back to Muhammad. Muhammad said, if they make you turn, turn, but don't turn in your heart. In other words, it's okay to deny Muhammad in a pinch to save your skin, as long as you don't fight against Islam. In other words, it's okay to say you're not a Muslim in order to get elected, but then everything you do once you're elected is to help advance Islam.
And Bill, you have to tell me, do we have any calls? What actually makes an authentic Muslim? I mean, to be a Muslim, okay, we'll come right to them then. To be a Muslim, does it just simply require a verbal affirmation? Does it require some other sort of action? Because, you know, we can have that debate. Well, is he a Muslim? Is he not a Muslim? If he says he's not, and, you know, you're saying he could be lying, but is there any other, I mean, we know he has Muslim sensibilities and concerns and all of that. We see that all the time. Is there anything definitive that can tell us?
Well, in Islam, if your father is a Muslim, they consider you automatically a Muslim. And so Muhammad's father and his stepfather, Lulo Sotoro, were Muslims. And so the Muslim world sees him as Muslim. And how can you tell if someone has left Islam? The only way to tell is if they are trying to stop Islam. They're willing to put their life on the line to risk it to try to stop Islam. If it's just words, then as far as Muhammad said you can lie. And
okay.
So I always tell people, even the New Testament says that. You know, they say they follow Christ, but in their works they deny him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Bill. Bill Cook. Let's go to the calls.
Sure. First question comes from a phone number ending in 9559. Go ahead and give us your name and ask your question.
Okay, I'm Rita Grace, and thank you both. My concern is, now in Culpeper, we have a huge animal slaughterhouse with Sharia compliance. They're praying to Allah, selling the meat, and we also have been warned of the refugee settlements. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, the only thing we can find online about the refugee settlement is that Catholic charities, some groups are helping. But we're trying to find out exactly where they'll be in our county, surrounding counties in Virginia. And thank you. God bless you.
Well, Rita, great to hear from you. You and Ben are tremendous, and I really thank God for you. The Ann Cochran has the Refugee Resettlement Watch website, and there's a World Relief Organization inside of the UN. It's picked 190 cities in America to move these Muslim refugees to. There is zero background checks going on, so you can be confident that a percentage of them are fundamental ISIS Muslims. The head of Britain, Gary Bauer, wrote in his recent email, agreed to take 20,000, and his surprised visit to Lebanon refugee camp and found out that they admitted to around 20% of them being ISIS members, and then they saw something that was unique. Most refugee camps are women and children because the men were off fighting and got killed. These refugee camps are predominantly men, and a large percentage of them are not even from Syria. They're just Muslim men from lots of different Muslim countries, and they're being brought in with not even a verbal refuting of their Sharia fundamental Islam. They're not even required. They're just bringing them in. And so the UN organization that's behind this is the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 57 Muslim countries, the richest men in the world, largely funded by the Saudis. And they've got a map of America, and their goal is to bring them in. And the thought is, are we being set up for an Arab Spring? Are we being set up for simultaneous Occupy Wall Street, Ferguson's and Baltimore's, sort of as an October surprise before the next election? And that if there was riots and mall killings, they would say, well, instead of canceling an Orioles baseball game, they'll cancel the election, And there are so many executive orders in place that if the cry goes out, President, you declare this a national emergency. Once it's declared a national emergency, he gets control over the radio, televisions, internet, financial transactions, can move whole population groups all the way back to the Bay of Pigs with John F. Kennedy. These executive orders have been piling up, causing a tremendous amount of power to be in the hands of the president. And so that's a concern. I hope I'm wrong, but we do see them infiltrating drug gangs. Hugo Chavez had been bringing Muslim terrorists to Venezuela for a generation, teaching them Spanish, sending them north. And so they've infiltrated all the drug gangs coming across the southern borders and, again, following into major cities in America.
All right, Bill, let's go to the next question.
Yeah, Rita, there's a report that was in that email that went out for today's event, and it's called Refugee Resettlement and the Hijra to America. It's a link. You can download it in the email that you received. Okay, next question comes in from a phone number ending in 0632. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Lucy Logan, and I'm wondering what you would recommend for good patriotic Americans to do other than vote for a different administration. What can we do now?
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Most politicians want to get reelected, and if you are making a big enough stink that it may hinder their reelection, you got their attention. And so I would call for investigations into who is bringing over these Muslim refugees, what background checks are being done or are not being done, who's receiving money for them being brought over. Why aren't the people in the communities being asked about this? Why don't they have a say? The government officials are elected by the people of the community to protect their property values. So if they're bringing them in and it's going to affect negatively your property values, they need to be held accountable. And so if questions are being brought to these people, and if they try to sidestep it, then go to the internet and go to the call-in radio stations and say, my politician is in favor of polygamy, wife-beating, pedophilia, and they'll say, what? I'll say, well, you're bringing in this group, and they have a cultural practice of beating wives, of marrying 6-year-olds, of the polygamy and chauvinism, and you're allowing this in, so you must be in favor of it. And put them on record to say, well, no, I'm not. Well, what are you going to do to stop it? How are you going to check? You can't look at their words. You got to look at their actions. And what's their actions over the last 1,400 years, and what's going on in the Middle East right now? But you know, you're the king. Our founding fathers set up a form of government where the people are the king. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he said the people are the sovereign of this country. And so the politicians are your servants. So don't let them – imagine visiting a king, and the king's sitting there in his chair, and there's a maid and a butler and a janitor, and they start telling the king he can no longer go into different parts of the castle. Oh, you can't go in there anymore. It was like, well, who are you to tell me I can't do that? Oh, well, I'm the maid. Well, yeah, you're my servant. And so when you have politicians telling you can or cannot do something, remind yourself you're the king. They're your servants, and you are accountable to God to what happens in this country.
Amen. So, folks, there's one piece of action. Call your senator, your congressman, and ask them to investigate what's going on with the refugees that we are taking in from the Middle East. And we need a full investigation and report of that process because that deals with our national security. Okay, Bill, I think we got 2 more questions. Folks,
3 more.
Okay, no more, folks. That's it. And no repeats, please. Let's go to the next one.
Phone number 7095. Go ahead.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi, Bill. This is Dran Reese, Sultan Light Council.
Oh, great, Dran.
Hey, Dran.
You are amazing. You continue to amaze us. You actually just answered my question, a full investigation, but I'm really upset with what you mentioned in Dearborn with this one man and having several homes and wives. My question is about that. If we know that, why are we not investigating them and holding them accountable and putting them in jail for fraud?
Right, because we have weak-willed politicians that don't want to stir up trouble. I talked to Lisa Chafin. I was doing a radio interview. She was the actress in Katie Anderson in the Father Knows Best series. And she was talking about how she was living in Orlando, and Muslims moved in, and a Muslim lady comes to her door and says, I want to invite you to marry my husband. And she says, well, you're married to your husband. And she said, yeah, but he can marry Christians and women if he wants to. And anyway, she said no. And then shortly after, sees him with a young woman, like a child. And he says, oh, that's my new wife. And she's like, why aren't you doing it? Well, when the police investigate, the women can lie and say, well, I'm just another relative. I talked to a nurse in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she said that she had to stop working in the emergency room because these young girls would come in with their genitals cut off. And she would go to the doctor saying, well, this isn't an accident. And he said, well, I don't want to stir up any problem. I was talking with Carla Dean Graves, who's a female doctor in Kansas City. A Muslim woman comes in with her husband to get medical, as a consultant, and they like her. So another Muslim woman comes in. She says, well, bring in your husband. She brings in the same man. Another Muslim woman comes to her practice and says, oh, I want to have you be my doctor. She says, well, bring in your husband. Brings in the same man. And so they're practicing their Sharia law, and the local police departments don't want to stir up a fuss. They don't want Muslims, demonstrating in front of their offices, so they just let it slide. What we have to do is we need to have the noise be bigger on our side and saying, look, politicians, you're letting in these groups that are saying it's okay to beat a wife. It's okay to have polygamy. It's okay to marry 6-year-olds. Sharia law says you punish the woman who is a victim of a rape. I mean, this is bizarre. Sharia law says to cut off the hand of a thief. We have an 8th Amendment that says there shall be no cruel and unusual punishment. So there's a clear break between what our Constitution, we say you can join a religion, you can leave a religion. Sharia law says you leave Islam, you get killed. It's basically a gang. When you study the political organization of it, it's very similar to the Bloods and the Crips and the MS-13 gang, where if you join it, you get the booty, and if you leave, they kill you. And this one has booty in the next life.
Okay, Bill, let's go to the next question.
Okay, next call comes in from 1154. Go ahead.
Yes, my name's Marie, and thank you, both of you, for this wonderful, informative time. I guess mine's more of a comment, and just a reflection to see if I'm completely off base on this. But my understanding is that sometime in the middle of August, up in Portland, Maine, 3 Somali Muslim men brutally killed and murdered a Christian man in his apartment, and left a lot of evidence to indicate that it was a religious hate crime. My question is the media colluding? It's covering these things up, because the only place that I found the information was on a random website somewhere, but I'd never heard it reported in national news.
Well, we are seeing that the president has put Muslims in key positions in the Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, the Pentagon, and so these things will get investigated up to a point, and then the investigations will be stopped. Because they don't want it. And then we see the media. We see how some of the news agencies, different editors and so forth, their spouses work in the Obama administration. And so there is this agenda that is being promoted. There is what David Horowitz called an unholy alliance between the radical left and the radical Muslims. They both see those that hold to traditional Judeo-Christian values as their enemy. And so we see this in Europe. Europe has gone from a Judeo-Christian past to a secular, free-sex, gay-neutral, and now Europe is going into an Islamic future. And so Europe used to be all Catholic, and then Protestant Reformation and Jewish neighborhoods. And then they had the French Revolution with, Napoleon spreading it all around. And then all the prostitutes and the free sex and the gay agenda. But now Europe is becoming Islamic. And so we see, when you look at history, you can sort of stand back and you can see these trends. And we're seeing this in our public schools and in the military in America, where it's gone from Judeo-Christian, where 70 years ago Franklin Roosevelt was passing out Gideon's New Testaments and Book of Psalms to all the soldiers. But now we see in the military the LBGT agenda being used to force the Christians out. And now we begin to see Sharia law Islam being brought in. And these, sensitivity classes that they're giving to our soldiers are actually proselytizing classes. And in the schools, the Common Core, that wealthy Muslims have bought ownership in many of the textbook companies. And so they'll have 1 paragraph on Jesus and, 26 paragraphs on Islam. and they'll have the kids learning the 5 pillars of Islam and saying the Shahada, their conversion prayer. You know, you have to say it in Arabic, but, you know, there's one God's name's Allah, Muhammad's his prophet, and having the kids dress up in burqas, take field trips to schools, and then the Gulen Muslim guy in Pennsylvania setting up these dozens of these Gulen schools where they'll take the staff and the teachers and parents on field trips to Turkey, and they'll come back saying, hey, Islam is great. And so we're closing down, you know, inner city Christian and Catholic private schools, and then we're opening up these Muslim charter schools. And so there's an Islamification taking place. And so we see in America, we've gone from a Judeo-Christian past and into this secular, free sex, gay agenda present, but in Europe's case, it's going into an Islamic future.
And, you know, I was with a couple, in fact, I was with a number of people last night, and one of the couples said that their granddaughter, who goes to a public school, is being required to learn the 5 pillars of Islam as part of this, some lesson that they're teaching, and yet the mere mention of Christianity seems to precipitate a constitutional crisis. But you can teach kids the 5 pillars of Islam in public schools, and it's just, and this is, I'm in Milwaukee, folks. I mean, this is flyover country, right? This is the Midwest, but this is what's happening. We got one more call. Let's go to that one, Bill.
Okay. Phone number ending in 7055.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Godfrey. I certainly do appreciate this. I have reached out to my representative, Senator Warner and Kane, and you say these people are not being vetted and all. Well, the letter I got back from Warner said that these refugees are already subjected to the most rigorous checks of any traveler, and this whole long letter, which I'll be happy to send to you. But how do we expose that, and how do we force the issue with them, I guess, is the question.
Well, would you send us a copy of that letter? Send it to stand@standamerica.us. We'd love to take a look at that, because that's ridiculous. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I mean, even Ben Carson and Donald Trump have mentioned that there are no background checks going on. First of all, how can they do it? I mean, these countries, their governments, they are being, you know, the ISIS Muslims destroyed their buildings. Where do they get the records? Ben Carson said we need to put immigration on a hold until we can do these background checks, until we can get, but there are no background checks being done. And the other part is the southern border. They call them OTMs other than Mexicans. 75 other countries are being brought into America over our southern border. Pakistanis, Turks, Somalis, and they're being infiltrating the drug gangs and migrating to cities and put in Section 8 housing and so forth. And so somebody's agenda is being worked out here. The Roman Empire fell. When China built the Great Wall of China, it caused the Huns and Mongols not to be able to invade into China. So they turned west, and it started this domino effect of tribes across Central Asia, which were the Visigoths and Ostrogoths and Anglos and Saxons and Jutes and Lombards. They first came across the southern border. I mean, the Rhine River and the European Roman borders slow. They worked as immigrants and servants and so forth, and they learned Latin language and they assimilated. But then they came over so fast they kept their own identity, and they basically was the Germans and the Franks and the so forth. And so we see that it overloaded the system. And so in America, when you bring them in smaller numbers, they assimilate. When you bring them over in large groups, like 8,000 Somali Muslims being moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, 10,000 Somali Muslims being moved to Boise, Idaho. They want to bring in 50,000 Syrian Muslims into downtown Detroit. And when you bring them in such large groups, you can be guaranteed they will not assimilate. And so we're bringing in these groups. That last caller was from Wyoming. That might have been why she was calling. Bill, listen, we're out of time, but do tell people how to get in touch with you. You have a wealth of materials available to people. How do they get in touch with you? Website, whatever. My website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily email called the American Minute. Now, there are Muslims that don't want to be radicalized. Zuhdi Jasser is a friend of mine. He reminds me of 26 million Muslims had a demonstration in Egypt, and they drove out the Muslim Brotherhood. The problem is our government is siding with the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East. It's pulling the rugs out from all of these moderate Muslim country leaders and allowing the Muslim Brotherhood to be brought in. I mean, here the president took out Mubarak in Egypt, fired him on the phone. The president took out Gaddafi in Libya. We were not at war with Libya, and now we're moving the guns from Libya through Benghazi to Turkey and Syria. That's most of what Hillary's emails were about, were inventory lists of weapons being put on ships, being brought to these ports in Syria, and they were going to arm the Muslim Brotherhood to take out Assad. But when Russia came to Assad's rescue, these Muslim Brotherhood people, armed and trained by America, go into Syria and Iraq and kill Christians, call themselves ISIS. And so here we are, our own government created ISIS. And then we rush through funding to stop it. And so we arm and train Muslims to fight Muslims. And when they get armed and trained, they turn around and join ISIS. I mean, we are either the most inept world power or we're arming the enemy.
We spent $45 million, I think, to train. Now I think there's 4 of them left. $45 million. Hey, Bill, thanks so much. AmericanMinute.com, folks, is the website to go to get access to his materials, get on his email list so that you can get his American Minute. Bill, thanks for all that you do. We really appreciate you taking the time. This has been absolutely fascinating, but it's also been absolutely chilling. So, folks, we got to do something about this. You got to get in touch with your congressman, your senator, and stay on them over it. Don't just, there's so much being thrown at us. It's hard to keep up, but this is one of the things. These are the top 3. Marriage, life, marriage, and Islam. These are the top 3, folks, the top three threats to the future of our country. Look, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I just want to encourage you all. Last Thursday, we had our first Christian Awakening Summit. It was magnificent. We had more people than we planned for, and there were many, many black pastors there from the south side of the Hampton Roads area, and they were inspired and motivated and committed to saving this country, folks. Don't listen to Al Sharpton and the likes. Just know that there's a tremendous move of the Spirit of God in the black community, and black pastors are stepping up and standing up for what they know is right. I just spoke to about 300 pastors here in Milwaukee. I would say probably 10-15% of the people in the room were black ministers, and I mean, they were on their feet cheering me. So, folks, there is an awakening going on. There is an awakening going on, and we are trying to do everything we can to spur that. We're going to do another Christian Awakening Summit in the Hampton Roads area on October 29th, and we just ask you to keep praying for us. If you are able to, donate to the effort. Just stay in the fight, folks. Just don't give up. I think we can unify Christians around this country. We can save America. We can get Christians to step up and get fully engaged and involved in what is going on in our country. We can save America. And I really think that that's where the battle lies. If we have Christians staying home from elections and not voting and not working and helping to choose people who believe in God, believe in our Constitution, believe in our Judeo-Christian value system, then we're going to lose the country. But that's up to us. Look, the left can't take the country if we won't let them. I know they seem to have gone a long way, but just keep in mind, George Washington lost battle after battle. Everything seemed to be going against us, but he knew that right was on his side. He knew that God was on his side. He knew that freedom was on his side, and he was on their side, and he believed he was going to win, and he did. And that's why we are the United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave today. So, folks, remember, we cannot be defeated if we will not quit. God bless you. We'll see you next Tuesday, 12 noon Eastern Time.